You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions.
Welcome to this podcast where we look at what it means to be a highly effective leader in today's climate and invite some high-profile leaders to share their views. I am Bridgette Hall, Senior Editor here at Criticaleye, and I'm delighted to be joined by Neil Hayward, who is one of our board mentors, and Alison Gowen, Group HRD at AG Barr. Today, we're going to explore what HRDs need to do effectively to align their HR objectives to their overarching business strategy, and we'll be exploring some of the key priorities for 2025 and beyond. So I'm so happy to have both of you. Just as a kind of opener, Neil, I'll start with you if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit more about your background and what do you see as some of the top priorities for 2025? What's kind of shaping the landscape today?
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Bridget. Look, I've been a board mentor for Criticaleye for a couple of years now, but prior to that, I was a chief people officer in 6 different organisations in 6 different sectors, and probably at most points of the kind of economic cycle, so rapid growth and acquisitions, and also downsizing and cost cutting. I now find myself doing a plurality of things. I don't really call it a career. I'm just Neil in a variety of different organisations and situations, trying to help the person on the other side of the table do better and succeed. And that's resulted in me now being a chair of 3 small early stage or startup companies, mainly technology related in education, biomedicine and HR. And I'm just about to become chair of a large NHS Foundation trust with 13,000 people and about 900 million of revenue. And there it's a really big organisational transformation challenge. As chair, I've probably been hired for that reason, actually, as an NHS outsider, because the trust has been created by a variety of, it's a forced merger of other organisations. They wanted a chair who brought a skill set and capability around defining and leading transformational change. So I'm pretty busy, but nothing like as busy as I used to be as a chief people officer.
I'm thinking about those companies that you sit on and now NHS. Do you think technology is going to be a big kind of focus of, as part of those priorities?
There's a kind of, I mean, the small companies that I work with who are in the technology space, they are clearly working on what they see or believe to be the future of the workforce in some way. And their challenge and struggle in some cases is to connect with the world of work as it is, and to help people who are very busy think about how the future could be, and making that connection is harder. So there's lots of reason to be optimistic and cheerful, but it's not automatic that technology is going to shape and change workforce as quickly as we perhaps imagine or think it might. There's a kind of lost in translation component still going on, both from the tech guys trying to, and they're mainly guys, I'm afraid, trying to talk about how they can change the world for your benefit, and other people being, in effect, asked to think about a future that they don't have time to think about and or actually can't contemplate. I mean, I was a historian at university. This is like Columbus defining the fact that there was something on the other side of the world at the point of time when a lot of people believed the world was flat still.
Yeah, absolutely. Alison, if you don't mind also introducing a bit more about your background, also tell us a bit about AG Barr. And then I would love to unpack what are some of your top priorities in your role, and where do you think leaders should focus their efforts to drive impact?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I am really delighted to join this conversation because it's very topical with any CPO at the minute. I'm currently with AG Barr, which is a soft drinks company, predominantly UK based with a small international business. We have core brands that you may be familiar with, brands like Iron Brew, Rubicon, Boost, Funk and Cocktails, and we have a milk and porridge business in MoMA. We have about 1,000 people employed across the UK. And I've been there for about 2 years now. Most of my career has been spent in retail. I had 10 years with Marks and Spencer, and that was in the UK and internationally, and also had some time in financial services prior to coming here. And I think a lot of these questions, regardless of what sector you work in, are similar questions that lots of HR leaders are asking themselves. And a lot of this comes down to ruthless prioritisation. That is a key focus for us as an organisation. I think when you're in the role of an HRD or a CPO, you are a business leader. You are not just focused on the people aspects of the business, and therefore what will make the business go faster, what will make the business more successful are fundamentally questions that you're all asking together. Simplification is another one. There are so many internal and external factors just now coming at businesses that you have to be able to simplify to be able to operate more productively and ultimately drive your commercial outcomes. And I think even in the world of AI and tech and things that lots of businesses are talking about right now and that Neil's already referenced, that still links into the factor of prioritisation, because all of that requires investment, and businesses right now have so many other costs, and they are trying to focus on how they will deliver within the year, how they will deliver within a longer term in terms of part of their strategy, and they have to carefully consider where they will get their return on the investment, and therefore how fast will the tech AI journey be for them, because it has to be relevant for that organisation. So I think it can feel daunting for businesses at times hearing about all of this and seeing what other businesses are doing. But certainly for the role of the CPO as well, it's around what's relevant for us, what's going to make our business simpler, more productive, more successful. And those are some of the key questions that I think are being asked today around that exec table.
Yeah. You spoke about that ruthless prioritization there. Where does it get challenging in trying to align those HR initiatives with business goals?
So the ruthless prioritization has to start with the business strategy, and ultimately any people strategy needs to be an enabler of the business strategy delivery. So that's where it has to start. And actually, if in an organisation that business strategy is not clear, then the CPO has a role to play in calling that out and in supporting that leadership team to define what that strategy should be, just as anyone around that senior leadership table has. So it has to start there, and it has to be around what are the business goals, what does this business want to achieve, and being really super clear on those. Otherwise, you can try to do too many things and succeed in nothing really, because you're spread so thinly and you're not clear what ultimately it is that the business is trying to achieve. Once I think businesses have identified what it is that they're trying to achieve, what's their goal, as we would call our business strategy, what's our crazy goal, what is it that we're really striving to deliver, it's how you're going to deliver that has to follow, because you have to make sure that every person in your organisation is really clear on how those goals will be achieved. Without that, it's not clear what their part to play is. So it has to start with, what does the business want to achieve? How will the business achieve this? And that takes a lot of time investment to get it down to that granular detail. How will we deliver this in the time scale that we've set ourselves? And that helps you with the prioritisation, because if something comes up, as it does week in, week out, that is not on that prioritisation, is not part of that goal, you have to be confident to say it might not be that we'll never do it, but it's not now. and having a common language, having everyone understanding what you're aiming for, everyone understanding their part to play, makes the prioritisation a lot easier.
Yeah. Neil, I was wondering, you've obviously had your exec career in HR and now you're on boards. Where do you think, now that you're sitting on the other side, where do you think like HR professionals could be better? They might have a view of what they think is challenging, but I wonder what it is like from your perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I like some of the things Alison was talking about. I mean, I do mentor aspiring chief people officers, and I do mentor chief people officers as well as CEOs and business transformation leads. So I get quite a good perspective on this. There are a couple of risks. I mean, the risk that I see a lot are kind of interested in everything but focused on nothing, and HR solutions looking for a problem rather than business problems looking for an enabler or a solution. And I see something else which is a little bit more rooted culturally in HR. So I think leadership isn't a title, it's a legacy. So I want to see HR functions or HR leaders defining themselves in terms of, when I finish this job, the organisation will have changed like this. That sense of working towards the legacy or the epitaph, and that requires something which this HR with attitude almost, which is we're here to make a difference, and we have a right to make a difference and the right to make a contribution, and actually we're an important part of the jigsaw here. Without us doing our jobs properly, this organisation won't succeed. It's that crucial, which means the CPO in particular is the person who is having the occasionally uncomfortable conversations around, we're not focused on the right things. This is to their executive team colleagues, even up to the board. We could do this differently and better. The counselling, the one-to-one conversations, particularly with the chief executive, to get them to do something differently and better. Perhaps one other observation is there's lots of surveys done, and you kind of asked the question earlier on, and I ducked it, which is key areas to focus on in 2025. But I find those unhelpful. If I was reading out the list from the survey or the State of the Nation from HR at the moment, I'd be saying effective performance management, comprehensive employee wellbeing programs, employee engagement, leveraging HR technology. And that's an aggregation of what the HR function thinks and feels. But whether they're right for the specific organisation or circumstances in which you find yourself, I can't tell you that. I can only assess that as I start to step into your organisation, and I'm there to challenge your thinking around whether you've assessed it and worked out what the solution is. So my start point, perhaps last issue here, is my start point with a CPO when I come in is not tell me about the HR strategy or people strategy. It's tell me about your business. A really good HR professional will describe what the business is and does, the competitive landscape in which it operates, the current trading performance and the risks and opportunities associated with that, who the competitors are, and then they'll get into the business strategy and how that's going to create an edge. And then we might end up in a conversation around things that the function is doing to make sure that strategy happens. And this is where I go back to HR with attitude and pace. The differentiation in strategy is the quality of the doing, not the quality of the thinking. I do not believe in my professional career I ever worked in an organisation that gloriously executed entirely the wrong thing. I did work with organisations that had the right thinking but didn't get it done, and they were beaten by other people. Yeah. So, ruthless focus, drive, legacy, outcomes, impact, rooted in what the business needs to get done quicker than everybody else. And that's a challenge for a lot of functions, but it can be a challenge for chief people officers, particularly if they're obsessed with the latest best practice thinking somewhere in HR, rather than the problem in front of you need to solve in your organisation in a way that works in your organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touched on it there around the relationship with the executive team and the board. I'm curious how do they go about kind of nurturing those relationships? What other relationships do you need? Because the CPO sits in a very kind of unique space within the executive committee. How do you see that?
You are right. It's complicated. The judgment I had to make at various points in my career was is it appropriate and right to be Neil Hayward as Chief People Officer? There's a certain style and behaviours that come with that title and brand. Or how much of that can I adapt and flex to the situation in which I found myself? And I must confess, in my own career, I felt it was better to be my authentic self. And that authentic self is to be relatively straightforward, honest and transparent, evidence and data orientated, prepared to tell the hard truths in the quiet moments outside of the showcase events of boards and so on, and to live with the consequences if that advice and guidance wasn't acceptable or wasn't needed and wanted. And that would be true to that brand around kind of HR with attitude, which was my kind of calling card. That doesn't mean that you aren't a very sophisticated, or I wasn't myself a sophisticated reader of the nuances in relationships. It's all about the judgment as to when you have the honest conversation. So the CPO, it seems to me that it's certainly the CEO, it's certainly probably the chair in most organisations, and then of course the non-executive population. The CEO needs to know what the rest of the executive team are thinking and feeling. The chair's always interested in how well the organisation and the team is operating, and you're somewhere in the middle trying to make it work better, but also from time to time having to reach out to other people to tell them that something needs to be different, or to seek their advice and guidance, or even input or intervention in order to make it different.
Yeah.
I didn't get all of those moments right. Absolutely, I didn't, and I don't expect CPOs that I mentor to. But the interesting thing is being prepared to have conversations, then making the judgment about the right moment. You have to be prepared to have the conversations to start with.
Yeah. Alison, I was wondering, have you ever kind of struggled with that, getting buy-in from your senior kind of leadership around HR initiatives, and how do you kind of strengthen your influence within the organisation?
I think the risk with this, and it links to some of what Neil's talked about, is that you do not make your people strategy or what you're talking about relevant for the organisation. You are focused on things that you're hearing happening elsewhere, what you're seeing in the media, what you might pick up at other events and things, and you think, well, that must be the right thing to do, without giving it the business context. As soon as you connect your people strategy, your people function, and your thinking back to what the business is trying to achieve, then the credibility, the relationships are there, because you are coming with a business first mindset, and that is really important. I think the second that it feels like your people strategy, your people activity, what you are spending your time on, which ultimately is a key question today when we talk so much about productivity, the second that doesn't seem connected entirely with delivering what the business is trying to achieve, is when you run the risk of either losing credibility or losing those relationships. So knowing your business inside out, as Neil has already talked about, is key. Not just for the CPO, actually for the people function, because you have to then understand why you're doing what you're doing and how it's helping the business deliver what you've set out to deliver. When you operate your people function in that way and you lead in that way, I think it makes a huge difference, because you have a voice around the table as much as your CFO or your supply chain team or your marketing team, because ultimately you are clear what you're doing is making a difference and making a difference to deliver the results that the business has set out to do. So it's really important to understand that. I think taking that one step further, it's how are you measuring it? So how are you measuring the impact that the people activity or the people strategy is having? There's sometimes a feeling that, well, we can't really measure the people stuff, or it's difficult to put numbers to it. And in some cases, yes, maybe that is the case. But when you really think about it, in the majority of scenarios or activities that you're working on, there's a clear link to the commercial outcomes of an organisation. Having the right talent in place is fundamental to delivering, your commercial results, and having the right talent in place is something that any people function would be at the centre of. And without that, you have the risk of not delivering your commercial outcomes. So it sometimes just takes a little bit more deeper thinking or coming at it from the commercial lens, but you absolutely can and should measure the impact that your people strategy is having on your overall business goals. And I think when you do that, the relationships are there, the credibility is there, and the influence is there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because I was just thinking, like, if you're a CFO, it's very easy. You either got money in the bank or you don't. But what do those like numbers look like with HR? And I know, Neil, you look like you were pining to come in there on Alison's comment.
I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I agree with Alison. But I mean, there are measures and metrics that we use in a scorecard for people, and obviously other functions have their own metrics of the business scorecard as well. But when I simplify it in my own mind, or when I'm talking to CPOs, the challenge I make them is not for them to describe the output to me or the impact of the HR intervention. I ask them the question, and this is quite often met with a slightly uncomfortable silence. My question is, so tell me how this is going to contribute to growth or improve margins or help the business cut costs. Because actually, I think HR needs a playbook in each of those scenarios, and the work we're doing should be impacting somehow in one of those things. And what I get a lot of descriptions of is the HR process, the policy, the timelines, the engagement, and I get a lot less around why that's going to make a difference to ultimately the only business metrics that matter. And I get quite a lot of silence still around, so what made you think this was the right thing to do anyway? Where's the business ownership or sponsorship? So, and that's sounding a bit harsh, isn't it? Because I'm not saying that actually throughout my career, I would have been able to be the person I'm now describing in the questions that I might use and that are quite challenging. But there's a bit of a difference between working in large-scale corporates, as I spent all my career doing, large organisations, and now working with very small entrepreneurial businesses, which I'm privileged and proud to chair. But they aren't interested in me bringing to the table any of my tried and trusted HR solutions. I'm there to help the founder grow the business. So anything that I'm suggesting or advising or encouraging them to do has to be directly connected to that mission, and because that's all there is. That's all that they need to think about. And there's an elegant simplicity to that in larger organisational life sometimes gets lost, and we over-engineer and overcomplicate and overthink it, and we end up in a wonderful world of HR solutions that I can't see have made a difference.
Yeah, I said, I had another interview where a CPO said to me, at the end of the day, shareholders don't ask what your attrition rate is, and while your business is obviously bigger than the share price, but the only metrics that matter at the end of the day are the business metrics.
Focus means there's an HR playbook for certain scenarios. So if your company is growing rapidly or intends to grow rapidly organically, your function is going to be focusing on hiring, onboarding people, making sure they're trained to do the job properly, and you're probably focusing on the effectiveness of your sales organization and your customer service organization, because that's how you gain and keep customers. So there's and when I'm looking at a business that's growing quickly, I'll still get told about the people strategy and the 5 pillars or whatever, and I'm thinking, what are you doing to help the sales function, or what are you doing to help the customer service? Let's focus on them, because that'll make more difference.
Yeah,
and I think the people strategy aspect in that scenario is good to have, because it shows people are thinking about it and not just going day to day. You're planned in what you're trying to deliver. As long as the strategy is entirely focused on the areas that are important to the business, like Neil's just said, you don't have to have a strategy that covers everything all the time and need to do everything. That brings me back to my first point about ruthless prioritisation. What's the business trying to achieve? How are you going to get there? And how does your people strategy align to that? I think is how it all comes together.
See, my second question, because that's right, that my second question is, after I've talked to a CPO about, tell me about the business strategy, my next question will be, so tell me about the workforce challenges you're facing. And a really good answer will give me a very good picture based on the data. It'll tell me about the number of employees and how that breaks down in all sorts of ways, by geography, by gender, whatever, by certain hierarchy and level, by skill set, capability. I'll have a whole amount of information based on numbers. And then beyond that, I'm actually looking for an answer that says, so let's drill beneath that picture and tell me about the workforce narrative. So I'll give a simple illustration. If somebody says to me, my regretted churn, my turnover is 15%, my immediate reaction to that is, well, what's the sector average? And if it's 13%, okay, you're a bit above. And if it's 20%, you're smashing it. Absolutely great. So that the number and the context have to be aligned. And then 15%, perhaps that's not a good number. Perhaps it's a bad number. What matters is, where is that 15%? So if it's 28% in customer service and only 3% in HR, that's how you might get to 15%. But the 28% is a red warning light flashing that says your organisation's about to fall over. Same for absence rates, same for vacancies not filled. It's not the aggregate number, it's the pinpoint number that matters. So again, when I say, tell me about your workforce issues, I'm looking for somebody to use the data that they've got and really pinpoint the problem that they've got to solve, and then start telling me about the actions they're taking to mitigate the particular risk that they've identified. Because actually the point in the organisation might be you can ignore 9/10 of the organisation. That 1/10 needs your ruthless focus, without which the organisation can't succeed.
I'd kind of like to bring it full circle to you guys to end off our podcast. We started with prioritization. What do you think are some of the macro trends in terms of risk to organizations going forward that they need to be aware of?
I think there are core macro trends that every organisation needs to think about, but I also think it relates to the type of organisation that you're in and where you operate. So there are clearly, things going on that impact everyone around tech transformation, bringing in AI, the expectation of the future colleague, so not who's with us today, but what does the future colleague expect coming to work, and that links then into people, we call it the war for talent, but how do you secure the best people in your workplace? And a lot of it links back to cost pressures as well in whatever environment that you're operating in. Because there, you have to think about what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve commercially and how are you best investing and allocating the resource that you have. So there are lots of different factors that will mean different things to different people. Recently, we've heard a lot about the D&I challenge that's come out in the last couple of months. For some businesses, that will mean a lot because they operate in those territories, and others it won't. So I think it's all about contextualising it, making it relevant for you, having an awareness of them, always looking out to the risks that are near and further out, making sure that you have a plan in place for those. But not tying yourself up in knots and dealing with things that maybe aren't relevant for you or are maybe not the best use of your time. And I think those are conversations that are continually happening around the exec leadership table.
Neil, from your perspective on the board.
I think it's quite easy sometimes to get a bit distracted by geopolitical or economic circumstances or something that's happening around you. And I have picked up something from this CPO retreat, which certainly, when I go back to the various organisations I work, I'm going to use this as a challenge to them, which is Gen AI is in the workforce everywhere else. That's the risk. So where are we in that story? Because it's in the workforce everywhere else. I've picked up on the fact that a lot more progress is being made in this space than I knew or understood. So I think that's one thing practically that I'm going to use away from this CPO retreat. But other than that, sticking to the broader narrative, I think the many and varied, diverse choices that made certain companies great in the past will continue to be consistent with making them great in the future, which is better before cheaper, revenue before cost, and there are no other rules. So basically, if you sell it for more than it costs to make and collect the cash, the jobs are good and everything's brilliant. And as an HR function, focus on the things that you can control.
That was absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Neil and Alison. It was so good to have you on our podcast, and I really hope you'll come again.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to take part.